Conversation, thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I was just hesitating whether it was afternoon or evening, but I was told that it's light outside, so it's still afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event that Alpha is organizing together with Wildeboer, Dellelce, and I like to say it in the original way. What we would like to do with you today is introduce you a little bit to who we are, but probably more importantly, share with you the unveiling of a white paper that Alpha has produced with the help of Deloitte and the contribution of 22 thought leaders in the technology industry. So this is for us a very important event in our journey. Technology is core, and technology issues are core to our own business, and I'll explain you later on why that is. And we are very pleased and very honored to be able to do that here in the Kitchener Waterloo area, that we definitely consider as one of the key areas that is critical to the future growth of the technology economy in Canada. So thank you for joining us. And what I would love to share with you first is a few thoughts about Alpha, because Alpha is maybe not that well known to you. If you look at the slide, you can see that it talks about Alpha Exchange. So Alpha is indeed an exchange, and we are now in exchange for a couple of months. We obtained our recognition from the regulators in April of this year. And being an exchange, what does it allow us to do? It allows us to list issuers. And one of Alpha's key objectives or key elements of focus is to list technology firms. We want to be a very focused exchange. We're going to focus on two segments: one, technology issuers, and two, something that we call structured products, which is more the family of exchange-traded funds, closed-end funds, all those kinds of products. Nothing else. That is all that we will do. So we want to be a very specialized exchange. And again, you'll see later on why we think that is important. Now, you could say, great, so you've been in exchange for 3 months. What does that tell me about who you are and what you do? So a few more words about us. Alpha as a company was created not a few months ago, but was created about 3-4 years ago. And when we started our operations, we were what we call in our beautiful jargon an alternative trading system. And what is an alternative trading system? That is a place where you can trade any security that is listed in Canada. So a place that is competing, if you want, with the Toronto Stock Exchange, but for the trading business. So we could trade any of the securities that are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange or Toronto Venture Exchange, as a matter of fact. And we've been doing that for now a good 3.5 years. And to give you a bit of an idea of where we are, today we represent about 20 to 25% of all the volume traded in Canada. So if you look at trading in Canadian securities, if you place an order to buy or sell a security, be aware that there's a high probability that you will trade on Alpha. And so that has been a quite successful journey so far, and I think still a lot of potential to continue to grow our market share in the trading space. But what we decided and what we said to ourselves, that is, trading is one thing, and it's an interesting business for us, and I think we brought a lot of value to the market. I think we attracted liquidity to Canada. I think we allowed for much more innovation in the markets space in Canada. I think we made the cost of trading much lower in Canada. But what else can we do? We're not just going to sit back and continue to do that without expanding our business. And the obvious next step for us was, of course, to look at the listing business. And we decided, what is it now, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that we would apply to become an exchange. And that process took quite a little bit of time, but we then finally obtained that exchange status in April, and now our objective is to attract issuers. So when you look at the issuers and who we want to attract, as I mentioned earlier, 2 years ago we sat back and we said to ourselves, where are we going to be a listing exchange? What are we going to focus on? And we noticed that there was 2 areas in Canada that were quite underdeveloped and underserviced. One area is the area of structured products that I talked about earlier, but the second area is the technology sector. So we noticed that the technology sector is not very well performing. You look at a couple of statistics and you will know immediately what I mean. Statistic number 1, if you look at the S&P 60, which is the main index for Canadian securities, technology firms represent about 1.5% to 2% of that index. You compare that with the S&P 500 in the US and you see the technology firms represent 20%. That's interesting. Second thing that we noticed, that is that if you look at the technology firms listed in Canada, the return on equity is much lower, or the multiples, I should say, the earnings multiples are about 25% lower than firms listed on NASDAQ. So why is that? So we noticed that there's something that is not working well. And at the same time, we looked around and we noticed that it apparently doesn't lack talent. It doesn't lack entrepreneurs. It doesn't lack people with ideas. We see that there's a tremendous pool of talent and a pool of opportunities that are there in the technology sector, but they don't seem to lead to large firms or successful listings on the exchange. So automatically that became for us an opportunity because there is definitely something that is not working over there, and that is when you find an opportunity. And at the same time, it was a good way to start when you look at the Toronto Stock Exchange, because they put all their focus on mining oil and resources. So it's good for us to focus initially on another segment. Now, when you decide to do something like that, when you decide to launch an exchange, you decide to go after listings and you say technology is great, well, you also need to make sure that you do your homework well. And what we decided to do, and I think it was the beginning of this year, Randy, we decided to do some real research about this. Let's make sure that we fully understand why the technology sector in Canada is not performing well. What are all the issues? Because just saying we are now an exchange, come and list on us is not enough. We need to tackle the issues that are preventing the success of that sector. So that is where we brought in Deloitte, and they did for us an analysis of all the academic research that's available. They did interviews with, as I said earlier, 22 thought leaders in the area. And the white paper is a result of that entire analysis and that research. And here you have a couple of the names of the people who were interviewed in that process. So the first thing that you look at when you look at the technology sector is, what is going well and what is going wrong. And what the analysis led to was a ranking, a scoring if you want, of 6 functional areas that we believe are key for a technology sector to be successful. We looked at what is the technology expertise in the Canadian market, what talent is there, is that talent being properly supported? 2, what is the public sector support? Is the public sector supporting the growth of a technology sector in a proper way? Is the regulatory framework, the regulatory environment enabling the growth of a technology sector? Is there adequate finance expertise available to help technology firms to find the funding, to find the support, the environment, the ecosystem that they need to be able to grow, to thrive, and to become mature companies? Is there adequate management expertise available to run those startups, those entrepreneurs, and to grow them to a maturity organization? And finally, the key point, is there adequate funding available in Canada to give those firms the capital that they need to grow? And you see the report card over here. When we look at the technical expertise, and this is based, as I said, on those interviews, on that research that was performed, when you look at technical expertise, we came to the conclusion that there's definitely a very strong pool of talent available in Canada. We see that the entire education system in Canada ranks as one of the best in the world. So that does not seem to be the key issue that we are facing. There's a lot of ideas there, there's a lot of innovation there, but we don't see it being transformed into successful companies. Public support, the second point, you see we rank that as a B. There also we think that there is a lot of government support available. You need to know a little bit your way, you need to know where to go, but the interviews clearly demonstrated that the view of the experts in the industry is that there's a lot of support coming from government organizations. The one question that was put forward in those many interviews was that funding is maybe a little bit too much focused on research and development. It is not sufficiently focused on helping firms to commercialize their products and to grow their products. That is definitely one of the questions that came up. And then there's also a question that is being raised about are we doing enough to attract potentially capital from outside of Canada? There is a bit of a perception that Canada is closed to foreign investment. I think some of the debates and discussions and decisions we've seen about Canadian strategic assets lead a bit to that impression, which is not necessarily very helpful to attract foreign capital. But the overall ranking for the public sector, again, a B. Then we look at the regulatory framework, and there, again, a B as you see, so it scores pretty well. And why a B? Because, if you compare Canada to other countries in the OECD, it is clear that we have an environment where a lot of red tape has been eliminated, and that setting up an organization, a company here in Canada is not that complex. Canada ranks quite well. Where Canada is not necessarily scoring that well from a regulatory perspective is the entire complexity around the IPO process. So if you want to take your company public, we were talking about that earlier, it can become quite complex. But this is a problem that is available in many countries or present in many countries in the world, and there's definitely an area where we could do something about. Then we come into the finance expertise. Do we have finance expertise available in Canada? And what we see is that there is clearly a lack of expertise available. I would not call it, and you see we rank it as a C, the most important issue that we face in Canada, but there's a lack of expertise available, people that can help mentor, accompany a firm in finding the various capital or the various funding components that they need during the various stages of their life cycle. And it is linked to the fact that there's probably a bit of a lack of interest. If you look today at the technology sector, well, or you look at the last couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years, there's not been many big IPOs. There's not been many big funding operations, and you see that many of the larger firms, larger investment banks, don't have the resources or the focus on that sector anymore. It also means a lack of research analysts, and that's a very important element also. Once you become a company, you grow, you want buzz around you, you want noise, you want coverage, you want things to happen. So we think that from a finance expertise perspective, after the bubble, the internet bubble burst in 2001, we have seen the entire finance expertise degrading in Canada. Lots of focus on mining oil and resources, but no one really focusing anymore on the technology sector. And that's something that we need to do something about. And, one of the key elements, of course, to recreate that interest, that focus, is to have a couple of lighthouse successful companies, lighthouse listings that appear on an exchange. Then we come in the last 2 points, and you see those are the ones that we score very low: management expertise and funding. So management expertise, that is having that capability with those entrepreneurs to take that idea, that concept, that initial product into a commercial success. Having the managerial skills to run that company, to take the right decisions, to do the marketing, to do the sales, just name it. There we think that there's really a lack of capabilities available in Canada, a lack of serial entrepreneurs, a lack of mentors who can accompany those organizations, the entire process. And it doesn't mean they're not available at all, but there's few. And we also have a bit of an impression that it's quite fragmented. We see some very good initiatives, such as, Communitech, of course, such as Mars, some initiatives on the West Coast, in Vancouver or in Calgary. But it's all a bit fragmented, and there's a lot of mentors and access to managerial talent that could be much more available if we could also create a bit more of a network of those people, bring them more together and have the ability to link those various hubs with each other. It's something that we need to address, and it's something that's very critical to the success of any entrepreneur, have that managerial talent. So that's something that we see as a very big issue. And then the last one, the funding itself. From a funding perspective, for us it is very clear that there is poor funding available. If you look at the amounts that have been invested, or the venture capital that has been invested here in Canada, it has been declining dramatically over the last 10 years in the technology sector. You see that the larger funds are not interested. You see now a little bit of a development with OMAS, who is focusing on a new fund that is looking more at the smaller companies. Everyone wants to invest in something that's already successful. So there's no money available for the startups, the companies who really need it. And then what does that lead to? Well, it leads to 3 types of reactions. The first reaction is that the entrepreneurs looks for an exit strategy very rapidly. They sell their company to someone else, and the story is over. There's no future growth anymore. The second strategy that you see is that they go to the US, and they may be very successful over there, but again, Canada loses it. And the third strategy that you see is that they list too early. They go to the exchange, they leverage what is called a reverse takeover approach. They are listed, but they're not ready to be listed. They face tremendous costs. They don't have the benefits of going through a true IPO. I always talk about the IPO certification because that gives you an image. That leaves a bit of a bad image when you go through that process. They don't have yet a business that is creating enough buzz and interest to create liquidity, to create researchers' interest. So you have a company then that is listed with a liquidity that is disappearing on the exchange, and it suffers from that. And any future need of capital that it may have becomes more expensive. So we have really, from a funding perspective, a lack of investors, and a series of choices and options if you want to find funding which are not optimal, definitely not optimal for the Canadian market or the Canadian economy overall. Put all of that together, we have an overall grade of C, so it's not the best grade you could imagine for the entire technology sector in Canada. Now, if that is the assessment, can we do something about it? And what can we do to reinvigorate, to kickstart, as we call it, the technology sector? And we came up with 5 ideas. And those ideas don't even necessarily need a lot of public money. And we think that those 5 ideas are addressing the weakest components of the report card that you saw. So think about it, the weakest components as we saw it was financial or finance expertise, it was management expertise, and it was the funding cycle. So the first one that we came up with is what's called crowdfunding. And that is a mechanism that allows, small investors, classical retail investors, to pool their money in a very controlled way and create a new pool of capital that is accessible to entrepreneurs, that can be invested in those young companies. It started probably in Europe, in the UK, where it has been very successful, and we have now seen it also being included in the Jobs Act in the US. So we think that that is a new pool of capital that we could create here in Canada, and that would bring new energy, new blood into the market to support those startups. The second element that we see is to continue to promote angels. So definitely we made some progress with angel investors in Canada, but more can be done. And one of the thoughts that came up over there, and again it comes from all the discussions that took place with those thought leaders, is to come with a tax credit. It has been implemented in British Columbia. It has been very successful over there. And we think that that is something that should be generalized in Canada to promote that angel investment. Again, find more capital that can be injected into the sector. The third element that we see is a pre-IPO capital market. And the question that I often ask in public is, everyone knows about Facebook. Well, now everyone knows the answer, of course, because the IPO on NASDAQ was a bit of a challenge. But when you ask people before the IPO on NASDAQ, where is Facebook traded? They all said, well, I'm not sure what exchange it's traded on. Well, Facebook was not traded on an exchange. It was traded on what we call a secondary pre-IPO market. So that's a market where an issuer can come, list, if you want, between brackets, its corporation, and where that firm or the shares of that firm can be traded amongst VCs, accredited investors, potentially pension funds, and it creates an initial pool of liquidity without having to list on the exchange. We don't have that in Canada, and I think that being able to create that would be very valuable because it provides a certain amount of liquidity without having to go to an exchange. It allows, we were talking about that earlier, it allows the original entrepreneur to maybe sell a little bit of his ownership and realize some of his value that he can then use to buy his Ferrari. But it doesn't mean that he needs to sell it to someone else. But it gives him access to some liquidity. It also makes other investors much more interested. Because if there's liquidity, the cost of capital goes down. So other investors who come in at an early stage will be much more open-minded because they know that they don't have to wait for the listing on an exchange to find a liquidity event. So that is something that we strongly believe in. It creates buzz. It also allows to communicate the value of the company. So it creates a lot of value. That is where Facebook has been trading for many years until they listed on the NASDAQ. And we think that we need that in Canada also. And then the last element, of course, a technology-focused exchange. And that is what we try to do at Alpha, an exchange that takes the time to listen to understand, to spend time with technology issuers, understand the issues, and try to find the answers to the various challenges. Because what we want to do is to support this entire cycle that you see over here, make this work. And it's not just about us saying, come and list on us, but it's also supporting those other initiatives. And that exchange will be different because we want to make listing on our exchange, believe it or not, more difficult. We don't want entrepreneurs to list too early. You list too early, it can take you to failure. We are very focused on liquidity. We have a unique market-making program. We think that it's very important. Getting that liquidity there at the beginning when you list is very critical. So those are the kinds of elements that we focus on. And we make the listing process far less expensive. So the cost to list on Alpha is going to be far less expensive than on other venues. So that is what we want to bring. And that element, I can tell you, that one is in place. The other ones, not yet. And then the last one, which is in the center of this diagram, where we lost a few colors on the big screens, but connect talent to startups, connect mentors, that is really what we mean to startups. What we're also thinking about is that we should work on creating some form of database here in Canada where issuers can find the types of mentors, the types of managerial talent that they need, that is unique to them. And maybe, today for an issuer, potential entrepreneur, here in Kitchener-Waterloo, that managerial talent that he needs is available at Communitech. But for him, it might maybe be available somewhere in Vancouver. And we have to give that access. We have to create that connectivity. We have to bring all those parties together. Those are the 5 elements that we think about, and those 5 elements reinforce themselves, they all come together, and I think we have to realize them all together. Now, it's nice to say all of that. What are we doing about executing on those 5 initiatives? Connecting talent and investors to startups. So what we will do, we are going to work on developing that network, and one of the first things that we will do is set up a committee on our exchange where we're going to look at bringing in not only the classical, and forgive me for the lawyers who are present over here, or the typical dealer representatives that you find on those committees. We want dealers, lawyers, we want issuers, we want venture capital firms. We want to bring together the various components of the ecosystem to act as an advisory board to Alpha. We also want, on a regular basis, bring the community together and have some opportunities to discuss and debate. We're also thinking about supporting, and we'll have to see what role we play exactly over there, but the build of that national database that I mentioned earlier, where we can create that connectivity. 2, we will support the implementation of the regulations around crowdfunding. The white paper that went out today, that has been made public today, we also sent it early this morning to the various ministries of finance and technology and innovation in the various provinces in Canada and also at the federal level to bring this to their attention. So we're definitely going to bring this to their attention. We're going to share those ideas with them, and we're going to talk with them to try to convince them to bring in that new vehicle in Canada. We're going to support the development of a grey market. We are looking at it, we're analyzing it, and we're looking at what it will take to have a pre-IPO, a successful pre-IPO market in Canada, a new pool of liquidity before you have to list on an exchange. The technology-focused exchange is there, we are there, and we will also support the implementation of angel tax credit in Canada, and that also we will do by discussing with the various governmental entities in charge. That is the action plan that we commit ourselves to. That is what actions that we will take. But it's not only up to us, and I think it's very important to understand that. We can be a vehicle, we can be a catalyst. I think we have been a catalyst in the past in the Canadian trading space. We brought a lot of change over there. We want to be a catalyst also in the technology sector in Canada. But a catalyst means that we need the help of the stakeholders, and we need you to participate to that. We need the various stakeholders in the technology sector to participate. So participate in creating those networks. Be open to networking. Be open to interacting. Don't just focus on your own area, but see what you can do to help technology entrepreneurs across the board, across the entire country. We need, of course, the regulators to be supportive of crowdfunding. We can push it, we can talk about it, we can discuss about it, but we need regulators that are open-minded and that, realize how important and how valuable this can be to our future economy. We need the regulators also to not over-regulate. We see a lot of regulation for the moment, and there's probably good reasons for that, but let's be careful that we don't over-regulate. We need to create an environment that's flexible enough to allow the flow of capital before a corporation is listed. And that is about setting up mechanisms, as I said earlier, like crowdfunding, but it's also supporting the creation of a grey market, which does not come with all the same requirements. Again, the point was made earlier, it's so complex to list. Well, you need an environment that is more flexible, that is easier, more agile, where you don't have all those costs. That's a grey market, but the regulators need to embrace that, or it will not be possible. We need to promote the example. So I said that earlier, and one of the beautiful quotes that was in the white paper that someone made, I think he referred to a soccer team. Not that I want to talk too much about soccer for the moment, because my team is not doing too well in the Euro Cup. But he was comparing it to his kids playing soccer. If you want kids to get excited, they want to score goals. And when they score goals, they get more excited and they get more involved. We need to score a couple of goals in the technology sector here in Canada. We need some examples, and we need to work together on making that happen, because that is going to create the buzz, the envy for more success here in this sector. Of course, I would be silly if I would not say support us, because we are standing up for that. And then, last but not least, we also need, of course, the government, all the governmental entities to support that angel tax credit feasible, and we also need to make sure they put a process in place that makes it doable, that the process does not become too complex. That is our commitment, but this is also our call to action, because we all have to work together on making this successful. So, if you put all of that together, what it tells you in a very fundamental way is that we believe in the technology sector in Canada. We know that the opportunity is there, we know that the talent is there, but that we need to tackle a couple of key challenges. We can tackle those challenges if we act together and act in a decisive way. The ideas are there. I think we need to execute upon them. You can count on us. We will definitely play that role of catalyst, as I mentioned it earlier, but we need all the stakeholders to join in. If we don't do that, I think there will not be a technology economy in Canada. And the technology economy, let's not forget it, is core to the growth of any economy overall. We will not be able to live on an ongoing basis only on mining oil resources and financial companies. We need to have a strong, vibrant technology economy in Canada. Thank you. Good. Oh, my mic is off. There we go. Good. So that was the very short introduction. I committed to 10 minutes, so everyone knows it's going to be about 25. And what I would like to do now is introduce Randy. So Randy is head of operations and regulatory matters at the Alpha Exchange. She also spearheads our listing business, and has a long career in the Canadian market. With this prior role, she was in charge of markets. I don't remember what exactly the right title is, Randy, so forgive me. But she was Director of Markets, I think, at the Ontario Securities Commission. So someone with a lot of experience in this space. She will act as moderator of the panel. And on the panel, we have with us Perry Dellelce from Wildeboer Dellelce, who you saw earlier, who is co-hosting this event with us. And we also have Richard Lee, who is running the technology practice at Deloitte. So we would love you to take the opportunity of this panel that Randy will get started to ask any questions that you may have, and feel free to be blunt.
So I think you can tell from Joss's presentation that key to Alpha's objective is to stimulate dialogue and find solutions where we find problems. And as an example of stimulating dialogue, we wanted to have this panel. So I'll start off by addressing some questions to the panel, but then I will open it up to questions from the audience. So you can put your thinking caps on and get ready to ask some questions as well. So I'm going to start off with Perry. We've basically looked at a report card of different factors, including technical talent, public sector report, regulation, the finance community talent, startup, management talent, and funding. If you had to pick one issue where you thought we needed to put our focus on in terms of trying to solve the issues in Canada, what would it be?
Well, first of all, this report card is very interesting because I wish Josh or Deloitte's was one of my professors in law school, because C is actually a passing grade. And I don't think we're there yet in the technology
Not to
sector.
my mother.
What's that?
Not to my mother.
There you go. So I don't think we're there yet, and the reason I don't think we're there is because it all starts and stops with the money. And I challenge any of you here today to list 10 technology-focused venture capitalists in this country, and you can't. I could name you 50 resource-based VCs or hedge funds or early-stage investors, frankly, and we just can't do that here. it's unfortunate. We're getting better. I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek when I say we're still failing. I think it's a lot better now. The last 12 months, there's been a whole lot of buzz about technology and the resurgence of this market. But I can tell you that if we did this back in 97, 98, this room would be packed. And so we're not there yet. And it really does come to the ecosystem of financing. We're not really there fully with the angel money and startup money. We certainly aren't there in the public markets. And in between, it's the most difficult. Actually, I think you can raise angel money fairly quickly now, and it's not too bad. Financing the public market's incredibly difficult, but it's the middle market, the sort of $1 million to $10 million number, that you can't get that funding anywhere. It's very tough. There's a few VCs. They have high barriers to entry. They're looking for things like revenue. Imagine that. But they are looking for revenue, past experience, all the things that are very challenging for an early stage company, but really things that they need. But we're still not there yet in allowing that to happen. And just one other point that I think that we do need, when this resource boom started back in sort of the mid-2000s, everyone was saying, well, we need demand, we need commodities, but what really everyone said in the capital markets was we needed a discovery. And once we had a few discoveries, the market took off. And that's very true in what you outlined there. If we can get one or two successful Canadian companies to raise capital all the way through the ecosystem and go public, hopefully on the Alpha Exchange, not getting bought by Google or RIM or anybody else, actually going public and making a return for many investors, then I think we'll have a winner. So in my view, it's about funding.
Richard, is there something special about the technology sector as compared to other sectors in terms of the importance to Canada and its growth?
Struggling with the technology. No, absolutely. I think I really do think that Josh said this, that the technology sector is core to a successful growing economy. And in fact, I've seen some research just recently that correlated GDP and economic growth with investment in telecommunications, and it's just a short extension. To that. I like one of the quotes in the paper from John Ruffalo, who talked about our natural resources being a significant advantage for us in Canada. But if all we do is depend on those, as John said, we can either continue to export them and buy them back as higher value finished products, or we can leverage that natural advantage and build globally competitive industries. I think that's actually one of the more powerful quotes in the paper. We have a significant opportunity while we are benefiting from oil prices and commodity prices to reinvest in technology to create the sort of knowledge worker jobs that are going to be important in the future, and also to create the jobs that are going to attract talent to Canada. We are, of course, in competition with lots of countries who want to attract entrepreneurs and innovators.
Joss, how important is liquidity, and what role does the exchange play in terms of providing liquidity?
Yeah, I think Perry was focusing on the word funding, and I would probably focus on the word liquidity. I think liquidity is critical to any stage for me in the life cycle, because if you have liquidity, funding becomes much easier. Take the example of a listed company that is showing poor liquidity, and sadly enough we see that a lot for the moment. Well, if that company is going to look for more capital, needs to raise additional capital, the cost of that liquidity, the cost of that capital goes up. If you are pre-listing, so you are in that intermediate stage, and you're looking for capital you want to raise, that 1 to 10 million that Perry is talking about. Well, if you don't have an environment where you can step in and step out, the VC or the investor who's going to talk with you is going to ask you for a much larger participation in your organization than if he knew that there was a way to potentially step out within the next couple of years, because that period, that what we talk about, the pre-IPO gap, that is becoming a very long period before companies are ready to be listed. And investors, are having a hard time to sit on a company for 3-4 years without being able to step in. So if you can provide liquidity over there, that funding will become more accessible and the cost of that funding will be lower. And then, of course, I would even talk about liquidity at the very early stages, the stages of the angel investors, make that easier, make it more accessible for them to invest, give them, the types of tax credits that I was talking about earlier, and they will be much more flexible also in the way that they invest. So the entire funding issue for me is correlated in a one-to-one with the word liquidity. And I think that as an exchange, we need to generate liquidity on our markets. We need to focus 100% on liquidity. That's what we should all be about. And I think that as a community, all the stakeholders, and again, we will definitely play our role in there, we need to facilitate the liquidity in all the pre-IPO stages.
Harry, do you think we need to attract expertise and investors from outside of Canada, or is there enough scale within Canada?
It would be nice if we could. I would think that I would hope that there'd be enough homegrown expertise in this area. There hasn't been so far. It certainly would be nice that there's a whole level of expertise that I think that foreign investors would bring. But I don't think it's a necessity. I think we could do it ourselves as well. But it certainly would increase the market capacity.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I think we have a tremendous pool of talent here in Canada. We recently ran an event we call Venture Capital Connection, and we were able to find 200 technology-based startups in Canada, and we put 25 of them in front of a group of VCs. But it took some work, of course, but it wasn't hard to find 200 really good ideas. One of them's actually in the audience right now. So I think we have a great pool of talent. I think it does need that, but that pool of talent needs help with management expertise and experience of growing successful businesses.
So the last question before I open it up to the audience is, are there some successful examples out there, either in Canada or outside of Canada, of things we should be doing to help our technology companies?
There are, but I'm not sure we can rely on those. I mean, the obvious one is Silicon Valley. The white paper also talks about Israel and how Israel grew a successful technology business. I think there are lessons to be learned. There are things that we can borrow from there, but I don't think there's an obvious idea that we can just replicate and drop into Canada. But I am excited about the ideas in the white paper. I really do think they will make a difference.
Any other comments from the panel?
If I could comment on the liquidity concept, there's absolutely no question if the Alpha Exchange or someone else could accomplish that, it would be a huge win, and it would make a big difference. And it has to be real liquidity. For those of you that are contemplating going public, that's got to be one of your first questions you ask the exchange, your market makers, your investment dealers, and your investors, because there's too many companies that are public on the venture exchange now that trade by appointment and have no liquidity, and they're basically a private company with a stock quote that doesn't trade, and it's a complete nightmare for management. And if they have to do a round, they're forced to do it at that low price because that's the market, and the dilution is terrible, even though the company's worth more than that, but everyone will point to the market price. So it's a bit of a mug's game if you go public too early, and you have to be careful about that. But nobody solved that technology, that liquidity problem, especially in a bad market. Frankly, now even resource companies are facing the same problem on the Toronto Stock Exchange. There's just no liquidity at all, and it's a real issue, and it's a real challenge. But if you can figure it out, you're going to help my business, I can tell you that.
Well, I hope I can help your business, Barry. That's what Alpha is all about. But no, the only comment that I would maybe like to add, and Richard, you referred to the experience in Israel. I think what is very interesting about the experience in Israel is how the private and the public sector came together, and also how they leveraged foreign capital and foreign investors. And I think what I learn out of that, and it's probably the most successful experience globally, there's no doubts about it. What I learn about that is we need to understand, and they're always very good about that in Israel, we need to understand the issues, we need to accept the issues, and then we need together to work on those issues. And we should not take the classical attitude, which is, the government has to solve this, it's their problem, they should do something about it. I think it is the sector itself that needs to work on it, and it needs, a number of champions who are willing to fight for it, who are willing to spend time on it. That is really what you need, and then I think together we can build that economy of the future. But that is a very critical component for me.
Questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm just wondering if the companies that are floating around in the ecosystem underneath the radar are so good, why aren't the US VC funds coming up and bothering these smaller Canadian funds and saying, you do the groundwork and we'll put in the extra money? And secondly, when you talk about an Israeli model, that was very focused on results and was driven, but still their main goal for a lot of them was to get to the NASDAQ. Why do you feel there's a need to not push to a technology-focused exchange just across the border, which would give you access to the exposure and the liquidity and all of those things, if the companies are able to get to that bar?
There is a degree of interest, a relatively high degree of interest in overseas, if US investors primarily in Canadian companies. And so we run a program called Fast 50 and Companies to Watch. One of the companies to watch out of Waterloo last year had raised $1 million in Silicon Valley. So there's an example that actually does happen. One of the VCs at our venture capital connection was from the US. And so that does happen. The issue is, though, that they do lose control because of the lack of liquidity, which I have to say is the key finding. Certainly was a light that went on for me as we were working with Alpha, Joss and the team through this. It is all about liquidity, and so the pressure to be liquid, causes those early sales. We've seen a tremendous consolidation, just for example, in Ottawa just this year with the loss of companies like Zarlink, and they all RuggedCom would be another example. So there are lots of examples, I think, of foreign investors, mainly US, looking at Canadian companies, but they disappear as a result. What we need is to grow a Facebook or a Google or a LinkedIn in Canada.
Well, there's another problem too, in that none of the market intermediaries are bothering or are set up yet for technology. Of all the investment banks, there's probably only 2 that have a dedicated focus on technology, and even that, for one of them, is relatively new. They've spent the entire past decade worrying about natural resources and maybe a bit of industrial. There's been no focus by market intermediaries, and what I mean is the investment banks, on technology. So nobody's bringing companies and taking them on a roadshow into Silicon Valley or Boston or Austin. It's just not happening. I think it's going to. You're seeing it now. You're hearing investment banks talking about, I'm going to hire a tech guy, I'm going to hire a tech analyst, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But most of them just shut down those departments, and I'm hopeful it comes back. I think it will. I think, though, if we had a Facebook or something like that was Canadian bred, it would make a big difference.
Yeah, the other question that you say, or that you put forward, is why not just let them go to the US, let them list on NASDAQ or maybe even on NYSE, because I think NASDAQ is not necessarily anymore that technology exchange that it used to be. But I think that is exactly what we need to try to do something about. I think that we see some of the good firms doing that, and that's a very, very sad experience for for Canada, because it moves those companies away out of the Canadian economy, and you might still have some small benefits from it, but the majority of the growth is going to be to the benefit of the U.S. economy, and I think that is what we have to try to stop. And what is going to be very important is to build that environment that make it possible to keep them over here. I think that is why we're trying to do something about it. The second point that I also believe is that interestingly enough, in my eyes, there is a gap somewhere in the entire listing space that could be filled in by a Canadian exchange. Because if you look today at the criteria to list on NASDAQ, those are maybe a little bit too extreme. And I would not even be surprised, if we manage to develop a successful liquid exchange here in Canada to attract U.S. firms, not the Facebooks of this world, but maybe some of those firms who are in that category between 10 and 50, and bring those to Canada. But we need first to build that environment, that liquidity, that can make them successful. So I think that there's an objective, in my eyes, that we need to achieve to the benefit of the Canadian economy, and there's even an opportunity to fill in, avoid a gap in the North American market overall. The other comment that I would make about U.S. investors in Canadian or venture funds in Canadian technology firms, I think what is holding them back, is what they see for the moment with the price-earning ratios here in Canada. I think that those figures. I think that price-earning multiples on Canada are about 25% lower than in the US. I think I was said that it's probably 25 to 50%, and you see something similar also with companies that don't list. So there is a bit of a fear, and that will only be overcome by roadshows and starting to have, indeed, as you said, some investment bankers that really start to focus on it and are going to promote those companies. But I think it creates a lot of fear with U.S. investors to invest in Canadian companies, because the track record for the moment is not good at all. And that is something we need also to overcome.
One last question from the audience. Anyone? Okay.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you on behalf of our firm. Thank you to Deloitte and Alpha for highlighting all of these industry challenges and problems, because we believe, and I know that people in this room believe, that the key to our future and the key to this community and the key to successful capital markets, I believe, is a robust technology sector. And it's discussions like this that need to happen more and more and more. And we need to get people thinking about these issues, and we need to get people committed and dedicated to fixing these things, and it'll be better for all of us, and not just those in technology, but for the economy worldwide and countrywide is more, I think, specific here. So with that, thank you on behalf of Deloitte, Alpha, Wildeboer, Dellelce, and Relay Ventures. John Albright had a family commitment tonight that he couldn't get out of. He sends his regrets. He's also a sponsor here. And thank you, all of you, for your attention, your time, and for being here tonight. And good evening. Thank you.